Welcome back, chess fans. Today I'm going to go over a game played by Bobby Fischer and Mikhail Tal in the 1959 Candidates Tournament. So grab your popcorn and let's go. So the year is 1959 and we are in the Candidates Tournament in Bled, Slovenia once again. I don't remember if I mentioned this in the last episode, but in the 1959 Candidates Tournament, it was a quadruple round robin, which means that each player got to play each other 4 times. And actually what's funny is that in this tournament, Mikhail Tal defeated Bobby Fischer all 4 times in their game. So it was a clean wipeout by Mikhail Tal. He actually went on to win the Candidates Tournament and challenged and beat Botvinnik later on. So it was an absolutely tremendous period for chess fans because Mikhail Tal was simply on fire. So let's look at this game right here. Tal opens up with pawn to d4, knight to f6, and then pawn to c4, g6, and you're going to notice that we're actually going to get the King's Indian defense again. And what's funny is that we're going to get the exact same line that we had in the last episode with e5, d5, knight to d7, and then bishop to g5. And here h6, bishop to h4, both sides simply developing. A6, this move once again chosen by Fischer. And here Tal plays knight to d2. In the other game, after queen e8, castles, and knight to h7 here, Tal played b4. In this exact move, in the last game, Fischer played bishop to f6. I almost said bishop played bishop to f6, so that's a tongue twister a little bit. So here bishop to f6 was played by Fischer and he went on to lose that game. So here Fischer instead chose to play something different. He instead played a knight to g5, simply bringing this knight over to the g5 square. It pressures this side of the board, especially the e4 pawn, and also in a move f5 will be played and this pawn will also pressure the e4 pawn. So Tal of course knew that this was coming, so he played pawn to f3, pawn to f5, and then bishop back to f2. The bishop on f2 is going to be very useful, supporting the c5 pawn push. You don't necessarily want to take the knight on g5. It doesn't really benefit you to take this knight, and if you're not going to take the knight, then the bishop's not really doing anything on h4. So that's why Tal decided to go back here with bishop to f2. Here on f2, it is actually supporting the c5 pawn push, so it has a very clear purpose. So here queen to e7 chosen by Fischer, rook to c1, and then knight to f6 chosen by Fischer. And then finally, as soon as this knight took its eye off of the c5 square, Mikhail Tal immediately struck with pawn to c5. And here bishop to d7 chosen by Fischer, queen to c2, and then knight to h5. And here Tal plays this move, pawn to b5. It was actually arguably slightly better to go with pawn to a4 and then pawn to b5, so just support this b5 pawn push. But Fischer was actually unable to capitalize on this move correctly. And also, this is not a very simple move to deal with. Even if you take this pawn, well, first of all, this pawn can be won back, but it's a bit tricky, right? Because there's still pressure here. The c file is open up. The c file opens up, so it's very tricky, and it's not necessarily. You don't necessarily want to allow Fischer's pieces to get to b5. So that's why, or did I just completely mess that? You don't want to allow Tal's pieces to get to b5. So that's why Fischer did not take on b5. Instead, he chose to take on e4. Traded twice and then played knight to f4, pressuring the bishop on e2, pressuring this side of the board. You don't necessarily want to take the bishop right away. What Fischer's plan was here was to bring the queen to g5 and threaten checkmate, and then basically activate his pieces further. So here c6 chosen by Tal, queen to g5, threatening mate. Fischer has to, Tal has to defend against that. Man, sorry, I keep messing that up. I keep saying Tal when it's Fischer's move and Fischer when it's Tal's move. Tal defends the checkmate with bishop to f3, protecting the g2 pawn, and here b takes c6 by Fischer. After d takes c6 here, computer calls this move a mistake. This is actually, out of the two captures here, b takes c6 and d takes c6, this is the correct way to capture. You want to open up the d5 square for the knight. You want to open up the diagonal. But the problem is, according to the computer, it was actually better to throw in this move, h4, instead of playing d takes c6 right away. And after pawn to h4, the queen, let's say, goes back to e7. Now you can recapture and your position is slightly better because the queen's not as active anymore, I guess. And also g5 is a little bit more difficult to execute. But of course, I mean, this is sort of like an engine move. Tal didn't play it, and it's sort of unclear how white is better there, well, at least at first glance. Maybe in a classical game, very high level players would be able to figure that out. But here Tal played d takes c6 and bishop to g4, chosen by Fischer. And after bishop takes, queen takes, bishop to e3, defending against checkmate once again, and also potentially threatening to exchange the bishop for knight. Here a takes b5, bishop takes f4, pawn takes f4, and then knight takes b5 played by Tal. He's now threatening the c7 pawn. So here rook to f7, defending the pawn simply, and then queen to c4, pinning the rook on f7 to the black king. Rook to c8, chosen by Fischer, and then rook to f3, chosen by Tal. Bishop to e5, bringing the piece to a better square, simply protecting everything here. And then rook to f1, Tal doubles up on the f-file, and he is aiming to put tremendous pressure here. What his plan is going to be is he's going to move the king to h1, so move the king out of the g-file, and then play pawn to g3, and then pressure the f4 pawn even further. So here, king to g7, chosen by Fischer, pawn to a4, a rook back to a8, and then king to h8, king to h1, chosen by Tal. Queen to g5, this is a mistake according to the computer, and Tal finds why. g3 played by Tal, an excellent move, putting more pressure on this f4 pawn, and it's very difficult to do anything here. You cannot take the g3 pawn, of course, because then rook takes f7, or even the queen takes f7. It doesn't really matter. These are both winning, so this is not something you want to go for. So instead, here, rook to f8 was played by Fischer, and then after g takes f4, Fischer blundered here with bishop takes f4, and this is a huge blunder because the bishop was necessary on this square on e5. What Fischer had to play was actually this move, queen to g4, not even capturing the pawn back, but simply sidestepping this attack. The bishop, of course, cannot be taken because f3 is hanging, so he would have been safer here, slightly safe. But it's still a very complicated position. It's still plus 0.9, so white still has some advantage in this position, but it's very difficult to use it, well, of course, compared to what happened in the game. Now you will see why this bishop was actually very important on e5, because it guarded the d4 square. As soon as the pawn is taken on f4 like this, knight to d4. And who is stopping knight e6? As a matter of fact, the queen also supports the e6 square, so the knight's just going to land there no matter what. You cannot take that. And once the knight lands there, well, that is a family fork. Forks everybody, the rook, king, queen, both monarchs, and also the bishop. Everybody is getting forked by this knight on e6 that's about to land on e6. So here, queen to h4 was chosen by Fischer, and here Mikhail Tal sacrifices his rook, goes rook takes f4, and after rook takes f4, he goes knight to e6 check, simply winning back the material. And after queen to d4, another check thrown by Tal. Rook to f6, because you have to block. If you move the king, you get checkmated. So you have to just block this check. And here, knight takes f4, chosen by Tal. He simply captures the piece back, and there's nothing you can do here, right? You cannot even play g5, because then the queen stops guarding the rook, and this is going to be checkmate in a couple of moves. So the whole black position is just stuck. There's nothing that black can do here. Fischer played this position on for a couple of moves, but after e5, d5, and then queen to d7, here is when Fischer resigned the game and Mikhail Tal was victorious once again. There's nothing you can do in this position. If the king just simply goes back to g8, you're gonna give a check, force the king back to the 7th rank right here, and then you're gonna take this pawn with check, and you're basically gonna be giving a bunch of checks. You can even win the e5 pawn. The rook, of course, can never block on f7, because you can go queen takes f7, for example. That's not even the best move, but this is something you can do regardless, because you have like knight to g2, and then you're gonna win the queen here, which is of course great. So you definitely you can definitely go for something like this, and the two passed pawns with the extra piece should be easily winning. And Fischer did not want to go into any of that, so he just simply resigned the game. So that was it for this game. Let me just go back to remind you. Yeah, the game ended right here. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I'm gonna keep posting these Fischer versus Tal games. That's gonna be my next series that I do. So let me know if you guys are enjoying this series, and I will see you in the next episode. Peace.